Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining us for another All In Together Impact Talk. I'm Kiara Powell, Senior Manager of Programming and Events for All In Together. And today I have the extreme pleasure of talking to a friend and an incredible journalist, Jordyn Holman, who currently works as a business reporter for the New York Times, covering consumers, retailers, and their impact on the economy. She previously worked for Bloomberg News, covering the retail sector and diversity within corporate America. Next month, she'll be joining AIT in Washington, D.C. on June 15th as part of our 4th annual Black Women Lead Conference. But today we have the pleasure of talking about her career journey and the lessons she's learned so far along the way. Hey, Jordyn.
Hey,
How's it going?
it's good. How are you?
Good. I'm so glad to get to have this conversation with you today. Can you start by telling us a little bit about what inspired you to become a journalist and why business?
Yes. So I feel like most journalists, I grew up loving to read and to write, and I would often just be writing short stories and all that. And I didn't know I wanted to be a journalist as a child. I knew I wanted to be a writer. I think what inspired me to get into journalism was picking up my mom's copies of Newsweek or Ebony. And I think in high school, I started realizing wait, there's people going around the world and getting this information and then getting to write in the story, and how cool is that? Now it's in my hands. And so I did a few different journalism programs when I was in high school. So I'm at Northwestern. I'm a Chicagoan, so that was in my backyard. And then worked on a magazine called On the Money when I was in high school, which was a great opportunity to learn about personal finance and to get used to talking to people, both everyday high school students like me, but also had an opportunity to interview the Chicago City Treasurer, which was a really cool opportunity. And that kind of set me on my path of, I want to do journalism. So went to journalism school, did the school newspaper and all of that, and just consistently got internships and landed in this career as a reporter.
You found your calling, found your gift. Why business?
Yeah, so I, once again, did not know anything about business journalism, but one summer I was exposed to it when I was interning at the Chicago Sun-Times. And I remember talking to some of the business journalists and understanding what that even meant. I mean, covering both the small businesses, but also the Fortune 500 companies that were based in Chicago. And I just thought, wow, they're talking to such interesting people that's different from the mindset of what I thought. You're not talking just to the CEO, but you're talking to the workers. You get to really cover a range of really important social issues. So that was going into my senior year of college. And when I got back to campus, I just took on the title. I was like, I'm going to be a business reporter. This is what I'm going to do. Everyone's like, do you know what that means? I'm like, no. And luckily, it fell on the really important ears of a professor who used to work at the Wall Street Journal, and he really helped further expose me to some of those key tenets of business reporting, like being able to cover earnings, being able to understand balance sheets, doing all of that kind of stuff, but also realizing that every story at the heart of it is a business story. There's a very common adage in journalism called, follow the money. And that's truly the point of business journalism. So that's why I went on that route.
Did you have to take a bunch of extra math classes for this? Just wondering.
So once again, I had 2 semesters left. So I didn't even have time for all of that. I think I took one statistics class, which was such a challenge. Shout out to my tutor who really helped me through that. But it was really, I took a business journalism course. So I went to the University of Southern California. Luckily, they had a graduate program that was a track that you could take. So I took a course in that. And then I did an internship at Marketplace, the radio show that's hosted by Kai Risdall. And that was a great opportunity because the purpose of that show is really explaining Wall Street to Main Street. So I got to see the ideation of the stories, getting to just understand the language, getting to know this company is the parent company of that company. So then by the time I graduated, I was like, okay, I know some things. I can maybe be conversant.
What I love about journalists, you can take something really complicated and make it real simple, really fast. And you do that so well. I have to comment on that. One of your biggest accomplishments so far has been your 2-year series on the Buy Black movement, which started in the summer of 2020, obviously the height of the Black Lives Matter movement, and has been recognized by the Society for Advancing Business Editing and Writing and the National Association of Black Journalists. How did that series come to be? And also, what was it like navigating those stories as a Black woman, not only just reporting on them, but experiencing them?
Yeah, so the summer of 2020, I was based in New York, and like every person, every American living it was very challenging to like just read about the news of the murder of George Floyd. I have family that lives in Minneapolis, so I'm aware of that area and the Black community there. So it's also felt personal in that way. But as a reporter covering the retail industry, I was tasked with, making phone calls about phone calls to large department stores like Macy's and whatnot, hearing that they had damage because of protests. And it just didn't sit right in my soul. I'm like, that's not the full story. This, multi-million-dollar company has a few windows. Like, obviously that's bad, but I wanted to dig deeper and not just kind of give the story that is expected. And so I talked with some editors, I talked with some colleagues just about how we can dig deeper. And what does it mean when people feel like they have to damage buildings, like to get attention? And it kind of served, like their points kind of served that like the attention comes from the building being damaged compared to the message that they're talking about of a life being taken. And so how to be really intentional about getting that voice and that perspective and that like next day story was crucial. And from then, this was also, we're living through the pandemic. Sorry to bring us back to our 2020 mindset. I was living up in Harlem at a colleague living in Brooklyn at the time. And we both commented on, it was really interesting seeing these Black owned business signs going up. Because we live in these predominantly Black neighborhoods. So I feel like, unlike some other colleagues who might not have seen those signs, we're like, there's something happening here. So that got us thinking, that got us asking questions and saying, I think there's a sea change happening, that businesses really want to highlight, their heritage, saying to communities like, we are Black owned, because customers are looking to have meaning when they're spending money. And, maybe you're not going to go out and protest in the streets for whatever reason, but you are going to spend money. So like, let's be intentional about how you spend money. And that is a business story, going back to like following the money. I felt like that was a really quintessential story to tell as a business reporter, that people are changing the way that they're spending their money to show support for the Black community. And so from there is like one story, just kind of saying that. But then once you publish a story, you start hearing from other people like, oh no, it's not just in Harlem or Bed-Stuy, it's also here, it's also around the country. Have you looked at Atlanta? All of those kind of things. And from there, it just became, it wasn't pitched as a series, but then it became a series because there's so many stories to tell within it.
Did you find that there were common threads in all of the places that you were covering that story unfold?
Yes, I think one of the common threads was usually like 2020 was not the first year that a Buy Black movement has happened. As part of it, I did a lot of research to look at the history of this. But what was different about 2020 is usually Buy Black movements, it's Black people really buying into it. In 2020, a lot of entrepreneurs told me, this is a very multiracial movement happening. And they could tell either through, the names of the purchase orders, or if you're a restaurant, white people, Asian people, Hispanic people coming in and picking up their orders. So that's how they were really able to gauge that, this has gone beyond the Black community. And then what does that say about how the murder of George Floyd is resonating with people? So I thought that was a through line that I saw often, no matter, where I was talking to these entrepreneurs.
And I think it's interesting because in terms of what we do at All In Together, that's another version of civics that I don't think people often connect those two dots, is like you using your dollars in a way to show what you want to support, what you don't want to support, is you being engaged. So important. Um,
Absolutely.
during that time, is there one story that sticks out more so than anything else? And what was the lesson that you maybe learned from it?
Yes. So I was working for Bloomberg News at the time, and Bloomberg owns Business Week, which is the magazine. And so I wrote a front page article on Ben and Jerry's with a colleague at the time. And the reason why we wanted to write about Ben and Jerry's is, once again, thinking about 2020, that first week of June, it felt like every company was releasing statements of either, we stand with the Black community, or those Black squares on Instagram. And some of them just felt very empty. It's like, wait, where is this coming from? Where is your actual policy? What's happening? And so in the sea of all of that, you get Ben and Jerry's statement that was long, substantive, used the word murder, didn't use euphemisms, was very clear on their intention and what they were trying to say. And I immediately was like, how did they get to this point? Because Ben and Jerry's is based in Vermont, a very white state. They sell ice cream. Where is this coming from? But then also Ben and Jerry's has always kind of been about it. So how did you get to that point? And so that's the question I was asking going into that story. Because, as a journalist, you're often looking at these companies this is what they're doing, but I felt like that this was an opportunity to almost use what Ben and Jerry's was doing as an instructor's manual. This is how, if you're trying to get to XYZ point, this is how you achieve it. This is the work that it takes. This is the amount of years that it takes. And so we were able to talk to the executives who put together the statement, but also hear about how day to day, they bring in community partners, people who know much more than they do about working on issues related to anti-Black discrimination or criminalization of marijuana or the environment. And so that they're constantly getting a feedback loop and not just saying, oh, this is my gut instinct. I thought, just hearing the mechanics of how a company operates on their social mission purpose, and then how they try to marry that with, they're trying to sell us a lot of ice cream. I really enjoy working on that story, and also feeling in 2020, you feel so helpless. We're stuck at home. There's huge systemic problems. And I just felt like, for working on that story, that was how I could use my talents and my role as a journalist to contribute something good, hopefully, to the conversation.
I love that you get to highlight the stories that are important because they are important, but also in a way that they hit home for you uniquely. And I think it adds such a different perspective that is so needed and not often seen. Do you think that Ben and Jerry's, looking back on it, was the precursor to so many other organizations sort of stepping out and having to make substantive change?
I think many companies, if you're a large company, you were already on that path, knowing that you had to say things. When I just I try to think of, okay, what big was happening in 2019? What issues companies need to comment on 2019 that feel small compared to 2020? But most companies had a DEI chief or an ERG or what have you. But I think the summer of 2020 really made a lot of companies say, okay, we can't just have this group. We need to have a plan. We need to put resources, money, attention behind it. And so if you were a company that was trying to get on the bandwagon, yeah, Ben and Jerry's probably was a good instructive moment of that. But also, I don't want to say that and everything was solved. A lot of companies just will never go as far as Ben and Jerry's. A lot of companies, maybe their social mission that they are trying to achieve, it's not focused on anti-Black racism. Maybe it's focused on gender parity. Maybe it's focused on climate change. But I think what the summer of 2020 and the subsequent months afterwards really did put into stark relief is what do you stand for? And companies and executives within those companies really have to asking themselves and the workforce that.
and people being held accountable, I think, in a different way. Because it
Yes.
I think it's easy to hide when it disappears. It's like, oh, thank God no one's talking about it anymore. But I'm like, but wait, didn't you say this mattered?
I have this receipt right here. Yeah, no. And I think, thinking about how my coverage on the Buy Black movement evolved, a lot of it in 2021 was about following up with those companies on those pledges, on those promises, on the $50 million, initiative that they started. What's come from it? I get that you're going to say, we have so much more work to do, but what has been done in this time, and are you measuring it? So I think that's also a really crucial part about coverage on diversity issues or social change, is the follow-up, because everyone likes a nice press release, but like, what comes next?
Exactly. Love it. According to Pew Research, Black journalists make up less than 7% of newsrooms overall across the US, which is shocking. As a former journalist, I don't understand those numbers. What would you say has been one of the biggest challenges and rewards of being one of the few people in that space, and especially as a business reporter and a woman?
Yeah, I mean, when I think about that, I think of this line in Isabel Wilkerson's book Cast. And, when you think about someone who's been a trailblazer, first Black woman to win a Pulitzer for journalism. But so she described how our country works, and that as a Black person, people just sometimes don't expect you to be who you are. They don't expect a Black woman to show up and be asking questions about a company's financials, or having the experiences that I've had. And so sometimes that can be a shock to the system. It's like, no, I've prepared, I've done all these things, but your surprise can almost seem like it's taking away from that hard work. And so I think for me, I've just always been surrounded by a great community of either, parents or education or friends, to just remind me that, like, I am talented, I am worthy, all of those things, but you are up against a larger system in the US where Black women aren't valued as much. And so I think it's constantly like representation and showing up into spaces and places that people don't expect you, that helps change things, that helps expose people to things, and being like, oh yeah, Black woman's a business journalist, okay, cool. Or like, this person who doesn't have an MBA is asking these questions on the financials, okay, that's cool. And so I'm certainly not the first Black woman business journalist by any stretch of the imagination, but if I am interacting with someone who just might not have expected me to show up, then that I get to be their exposure.
And you provide a voice for other people to see themselves in that space, which is really special.
I hope, yeah. I mean, I think when it comes to business journalism, it can seem so wonky. It's like, okay, is this just about stocks and bonds and la la la? And I see it as literally, you get to write about how the world works. You get to write about anything. As long as you can find a dollar value, like put it in there, it really just gives you a very specific lens to stories. And it makes these stories so urgent, because we live in a capitalist society. Like, it is driven on money, and to be able to understand that better and to translate like that the world is operating this way, you are seeing the world this way because of XYZ company's decision. I think that's so powerful. Just to go back to the real reason of journalism is like letting people know new things. And I think business journalism is like an amazing avenue to do that.
Love it. Switching gears very briefly, your recent coverage on Bed Bath & Beyond and Shein has really brought a new spotlight on the changing landscape of the retail space. Do you see any common threads in the ways businesses are trying to move forward?
Yeah, so we are in like this new chapter of our economy right now. So the pandemic 2020 gave us one chapter, 2021 was supply chain, 2022 was this inflation, all that kind of stuff. But now we're in this like, okay, largely our COVID worries are put aside. inflation is just kind of still here. So then like, how do we operate in this new normal? And I think at least how I'm pursuing all the stories I'm working on is like, what are companies now doing that if all things are equal, like how do you win in this normal society? And so for Bed Bath & Beyond, they were on my beat the largest bankruptcy so far in 2023, and that was and like obviously that's tough. It's such a name brand store, and it was interesting as a business journalist. I'm covering like their earnings. I'm seeing the financial decline, but when they filed bankruptcy, it was such a reminder that the love, the loyalty that people still had, the shock that people still had, it's just a reminder like to marry the fundamentals of business reporting, but also like the emotions of life and society that
Personal.
I remember being, yeah, it's very, very personal. And so I think just going kind of back to your question about like how companies win in this, it's just making sure you're really tapped in to shoppers and maybe capitalize on that love and that personality that you've accrued over the years. But it's definitely tough. Like it's, even though the pandemic, like I said, worries are aside, companies have all new worries going into 23 and as we, get to next year already.
I mean, with AI, with the way that consumers are changing, there is no end to the way you have to pivot, I feel like.
Yes, and it's something I've actually written about, that there's a lot of open CEO positions in the retail industry right now. And so as I was reporting that story, it was like, wait, why? And one big thread came out that if you are running a large retail company right now, it's not just good enough that you know marketing, which products should be in which stores, all that good stuff, which is table stakes. Yeah, you need to be thinking about AI, the metaverse, the unintended consequences of all of those things. You need to think about, do you need private label because people are being more reticent to shop? Do you need what in your app needs to be added that in 5 years it could take off? Like all of these certain skills, you just need to be aware of. And then going back to shoppers' expectations that you were doing something good for the environment, you were doing something good for society. What's your DEI plan? Like the list goes on and on and on. And that's all, like it's required now.
And they don't teach that. I feel like things are changing at such a rapid pace. We see that on the legislative side. The world is changing so fast that we just can't keep up. And so to see it also happening from a business perspective is wild, truly.
Yes. Yeah. And then it's like, so Gen Z customers, they want something. Your customers who are baby boomers who've been shopping for decades with you, they want something. So yeah, I love the political through line, because it's like that's the same thing in our political system. It's like, who are you catering to? Obviously you're saying I'm catering to everyone, but I don't know. And I just find there's so many stories in that tension.
It'll be an interesting couple of years, and I'm so excited to see how you report on it and the new ways you find to tell those stories. Everyone should be excited. I am incredibly pumped that you are going to be a part of Black Women Lead in June on the 15th. And if you want to be there, you should sign up on our website. Tickets are available. What do you see as the most important, what do you see as one of the most important things about convenings of Black women like this?
Even you asking that question, I just like did this sigh of excitement. I feel that it, like spaces like those really just fill my cup, because oftentimes when you're networking, you have to like, okay, what do you do? But I feel like in spaces with other Black women, you just get straight to the point. You don't have to over explain things. You have shared experiences. It's just rejuvenating. And I learned so much. I love talking to people who've gone before me and hearing their perspectives and being like, oh, that's normal. Okay, cool. Or like, oh, that's jewelry. Got it. Okay. And I just absolutely love it. And I just feel like it's just relaxing. And when you think about the past 3 years, where one, the first part of the pandemic, it was all virtual. And then, you have your fits and stops and all that kind of stuff. But now that it seems like we're doing it, we're having these in-person events. It's just so lovely. I've missed it so much. And there's nothing that replaces that.
Same. I feel very much aligned with your thought. So I'm excited, and I hope that everyone watching will come and join us, or at least tune in online and get to hear more from you at Black Women Lead. June 15th, Washington, D.C., Howard Theater. You can find the tickets on our website, aitogether.org. Jordyn, thank you so much for joining me today. It has been a delightful conversation.
Thanks, Kiara. You're the best.